Mike, I want to speak with you a little bit about evangelization, and I look forward to the conversation because you come at it with a distinctive slant, and that is your work as a missioner in Africa and Zimbabwe and dealing with the Tonga people. I often find it enlightening to speak with people on a topic where the other person has a distinctive perspective. In other words, most of the time, living in our own country, in our own culture, perspectives tend to be similar because we're a product of this society, we're influenced by the institutions, our imagination is shaped by the symbols of our culture, and so on. So there's a certain sameness to the conversations we have about major topics. But what I find fascinating in talking to you is that it's just a totally different perspective that you have developed over the years, 6 years working with the Tonga people. And so I want to play to that a little bit and to talk about evangelization in that way. But first I'd like to see if you sense some of that yourself. I mean, like when you come back to this country from Africa, do you somehow sense this different perspective that you've developed and feel any conflict with the kinds of viewpoints, outlooks you find here?
I think it was Father Vince Donovan that said after living in he had lived in Kenya for a while, that you come back with missionary eyes or missionary ears. He used that expression. Mm-hmm. And I probably, after living 6 years with the Tonga, become partly Tonga. So as I hear what questions people are facing here and what their issues are, I come with maybe a different sensitivity that I didn't have before I went, and I thank the Tonga people for that sensitivity. They're so open to people that when I experience here any kind of lack of respect toward a person because they're from a different culture or they're a minority, it just grates against me, and that comes from them, I think. I'm sure that was always a part of my life in some way, but has been deepened in them.
So you have sort of a reverse culture shock in a way. Most people think of, well, the culture shock would occur when you would leave the United States and go live in another country, and those of us who've had that experience know it in some way. It's one thing to live in a European country, it's another to live in an African country, I believe. And we think of culture shock in that way, and I'm sure you must have experienced that. But you also experience culture shock when you return, which is probably more fascinating.
Probably the thing is you're confronted with so many more choices here than you are in living with the Tonga people. There, the question is, do we have bread today or this week? Where here, you go into the grocery store and you've got so many different kinds of bread, and that's true of any kind of type of food commodity or commodities.
I suppose it would be true even like choosing entertainment or choosing other things in our culture.
Well, like
many options.
There's so many more choices here, and you could call them opportunities, or you can, in a negative way, you could say there's a lot more noise here that you have to live with and learn to contend with to still hear your heart and hear yourself.
Well, that's an interesting phrase. Yeah, are you using noise even literally there? That things there's a lot more clamor and
much more
incessant television reports or radios on, or
wherever you go, there's some kind of noise coming at you, and it's even.
And you notice it.
Even to go out.
It must drive you crazy to go to some of the young people's dances today, or to try to carry on a conversation at a party of young people where the music is very loud. That's an interesting slip.
Well, but it is, and as we talked about adapting, and that's an important part of living here as well, that anyone who leaves the country here and living in another situation, whether it be in Europe or in some other continent, that you do have to relearn who you are when you come back home. So there definitely is another type of shock and adjustment that happens when anybody comes back here.
The part of evangelization, Mike, has to do with this interplay between the gospel and the culture in which it is proclaimed. Part of that is to be able to proclaim the message in such a way that people can understand it, so it resonates with their experience. That's a matter of refocusing and reinterpreting the message so that it makes sense to people, so it's put into their language, into their terms, so the liturgy reflects their customs and habits. The other part of the evangelization flow seems to me that we learn from the cultures. And you bring back a wealth of experience from dealing with the Tonga people that can help us understand things about our faith, our understanding of the community of saints, for example, or how we understand the marriage process, family life, hospitality, so many things we can learn from them. But there's a third aspect to it that I want to focus on here, and that is the transformation of culture. Pope Paul VI wrote a famous encyclical, Evangelii Nunciandi, on evangelization. These encyclicals are often named after the first two Latin words that make them up, and so that's why they have strange names like Pacem in Terris or Rerum Novarum, etc., Centesimus Annus. And this one is Evangelii Nunciandi. In 1975, Pope Paul VI became the great champion of this notion of evangelization. He made it sort of the center of his whole understanding of what Christianity is about, and he talked about proclaiming the message, finding a unified Christian teaching and be able to proclaim it in different ways in different cultures. But he also had a phrase in there which I'd like to pick up on, that is the evangelization of culture. And that was a strange idea to many people. And I think in my language it means how does the Christian message, how does the gospel try to transform situations, make them more humane, make them more Christian in one way or another. So I'd like to focus on that aspect of all of this, transformation of culture.
Maybe I can introduce kind of an image to work with so we don't lose a perspective. Like in this whole idea of transformation of culture, when we talk with the Tongas and try to help them, give them opportunities to discuss what's good from their life and what's not so good, we use the image of a basket, because they take the basket which they make themselves, it's weaved, and it has small holes in it, so you can use it as a sifter, and they have their flour in there, let's say corn flour, and it goes back and forth, and then there's some of the larger pieces that remain, and they're thrown to the chickens, if there's a luxury of a good harvest. Otherwise, every little bit is saved. Or grains of seed, the grains are in there sifted, and the little bit that remains is often discarded. And I think that's what can happen, what needs to happen in our the dialogue that happens in enculturation of the gospel, that as faith and culture are in dialogue with each other, there should be some things within the culture that are seen that aren't so good, and that people need to let go of. It's hard for us coming from the outside to be the ones to say that. It has to come from the people themselves, just as I don't want someone from another country telling me what they don't like about our life here in the United States. I'd much rather hear it from ourselves than from the outside.
On the other hand, Mike, sometimes the outsider sees things that the insider doesn't see. We take the classic example in the United States of Alexis de Tocqueville, the French aristocrat who visited the United States in the 1830s and wrote Democracy in America, and he's still quoted today, and many people feel that he understood us better than we ever understood ourselves, and has given us insight that we wouldn't have had otherwise. We still draw on that great work. I mean, we could say he was a genius and, happened to have a feel for the culture, and surely not everybody can do that, and we've had many visitors who wouldn't understand us, and we've got many ugly Americans who went around the world and made quick judgments upon the culture without knowing anything. So, I mean, I see your point in one sense, but I think we have to hold open the possibility, at least, that the outsider sees something about the culture, both good and bad, that the insider doesn't see.
Yeah, okay.
You would go along with that in general.
It's more of the extremist position, I think, that
that you would want to be careful of.
Avoid, yeah.
And I think, and that
really,
obviously that's the more common situation where people make too quick a judgments and don't listen. What I got out of what you said for myself was that idea that if you listen to them, you will begin to ferret out what they see as positive
right.
and what they see as negative in their culture.
Right.
That probably would even come out in their liturgies, maybe. And I know they have extended prayers of the faithful that they do at Mass, and maybe if one listened closely to those, one would get a sense of positives and negatives within the culture.
We talked about one of the things that I see where I've learned from them that they're trying to work with is the whole reality of fear in their lives. And because those who have died have a lot of power still in the life of the Tonga person and in the family, that can be abused. And let's say the traditional healer who could take advantage of people, or does take advantage of people at times, and bringing about more conflicts in families and in between villages, where there can be some witchcraft involved, or some poisoning involved, and sometimes people live with a lot of fear, and they try to do what they're told to do by the healer, because they have to appease their ancestor. And then, in effect, what happens is a lot of living out of fear rather than out of respect. So within
do those fears, Mike, go mainly to that ancestor question, that
right.
they are somehow influenced by those who have died?
Right.
And, Can you make that more concrete for me? Give an example of somebody.
Well, let's say that some misfortune occurs in a family's life, then they want to understand why that's happened. You know, there isn't necessarily a natural understanding, but it happened for a reason, and that someone's upset with them, one of their ancestors, and they want to understand what they need to do about that.
And so the healing person, what would that phrase, witch doctor, where does that fit into it? Do they still use it?
Well, they use the expression in Tonga. It's called nganga, and I think it's more. It's better to interpret it as the healer, rather than the witch doctor, because some are very good, and the whole idea of witch doctor implies witchcraft, and that's not necessarily what's there.
So if we talk about this person as the healer, then we could see an ambivalence in it. In other words, there would be good healers, and bad healers. It's like we got good everything,
right.
Doctors, lawyers, priests, whatever,
right.
Some good, some not so
exactly.
good.
Yeah.
And
they'll even talk about them. They know who the good ones are and the bad ones are. And yet there's a temptation still to go to those who are going to cause more trouble in their life. And sometimes it's because they don't get an answer to their misfortune, or an understanding to cope with their misfortune. The illness still is there. People keep dying in their family, whatever it is. So they go back, and they're given something to do, whether it's offer sacrifice, offer beer, traditional beer to the ancestor, do a specific ceremony that they haven't done yet, honoring the person who has died. And in the positive light, there is this whole sense of communion of saints, respect for the ancestor, love for those who have died, their love which still lives in the family, lives on. And the negative aspect can be this part of a controlling fear that in some ways can cause people within the church community to live a double life, or almost a split life, saying they'll go to church and then go to the healer. Yes. And live both. Well, there should be a way to integrate that, but we haven't.
Hard to find.
It hasn't happened in a general scale yet for the people.
Would you say, Mike, that one of the problems, therefore, in the culture from the Christian viewpoint, as we would try to humanize or transform the culture, is that an excessive sense of magic, the almost magical notions in relationship to the ultimate powers that control life and so on, that you have to appease them or do the right ceremonies or the right rituals to make it come out right? Or
magic, or is it not more mystery? You know, just their...
You're not comfortable with that?
I'm not comfortable with magic.
Idea.
That sounds a bit negative.
Yes,
and because what they're dealing with is something very real to them. They're concerned. Someone has died, and lightning has struck their hut and has burned all their possessions. Someone's mad at them. How do they resolve that in their life? And then...
What do you do with something like a gospel passage where the man is born blind in John's gospel, and the question is asked, why is this man blind? And Jesus says, well, they assume it's either the sin of the parents or the sin of the blind man, And Jesus says, well, neither one. This has got to do with the glory of God, an enigmatic answer, but certainly not pinning the blame on anyone. Excuse me, I wonder what that would do to their understanding of this overall situation.
Well, it would give a good opportunity to discuss some of their own issues as they deal with them in sickness and in dealing with their ancestors. On that one, it would be great to sit down with a group of them and just talk about it and read that gospel and let them talk about it. But sometimes they'll be more open with themselves than if one of us is there from the team, because there's something very sacred, so sacred that they don't share with everyone some of the rituals and some of the traditions that they have.
Even after you've served there for a long period of time?
There's a lot I don't know.
Isn't it interesting? Yeah. Well, Mike, if I look at this in terms of our own context in the United States and what we try to do, it always seems to me there's a dialectical relationship between the gospel and the culture. That is, from the perspective of the Christian message, when we look at U.S. culture, we say, well, there's some good things here. We like freedom. That seems to be a good thing. Participation. The theory that we should actualize our gifts and talents. I mean, these seem to be positive things in our culture. Tolerance for others and so on. On the other hand, we look at the culture and say, yeah, but there's things that seem to be opposed to what the Christian message is all about, like excessive individualism or consumerism or materialism. And we say, well, we have to try to transform that. Our task in the United States is to say, how are you going to create more community? And we say, well, in the Catholic tradition, we got a wonderful idea of community. We're saved as a member of a people. We gather for Eucharist as a group. We believe that we have responsibilities for the common good. All these messages that we get in church or as part of the Christian tradition seem to be a counterpoint to the cultural emphasis on individualism. And I see that as a way of thinking about this whole question, how do we transform the culture? We pick up the positive things, build on them, see the negative things, and see if we can't find ways to somehow overcome them, transform them, make them function better. Now, I'd like to take just one other nuance I might add to that, and that is that in the United States, I don't think it's very helpful to think of the church as a countercultural force. I think the church usually does better when it finds some trend within the culture as a whole that it can latch on to, collaborate with to make progress. Let me take an example. If we say we got excessive materialism and affluence means too much to us and so on, and we got to get back to simpler lifestyles, well, what we can look at in the long history of American culture, we see there is an emphasis on simplicity. You can go back to Henry David Thoreau and going off into the woods and living a simpler life, or many community movements. And so it's not just like the church has got some totally foreign, challenging message, but it seems though the church can almost always find some trend within the culture it could latch on to or make common cause with to try to improve it. Now, taking that experience that we would all recognize here in the United States, I want to go back to your context there in Zimbabwe and see if you could pick up on any of that or any other trends within the culture that you think need to be transformed in some way and how one would go about it.
Well, mention this one that we're trying to address within the church communities, that of fear, and how ideally it's moving out of that fear into one of trust, and trusting in the God who's with them and stronger than the power of any evil force. As we discuss this, what comes to my mind are more some of the social evils that have creeped into the society and the culture of the people that they have to deal with. I think of AIDS. I think of the drought situation they face right now. I think of this whole trend toward urbanization. There seems to be a lot of the village life and family tribe is being broken down because people are moving to town. The young people are attracted to town to get a job, and there's no jobs there. There's a terrible unemployment rate within all of Africa, within many countries of Africa, but especially in Zimbabwe. and now we have, as opposed to before, within our area, educated youth who are going without jobs, and a lot of free time on their hands. What do? There tends to be more crime.
Well, it almost sounds like our urbanization problems, huh? I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah, there's a lot of similarities.
They might be repeating some of our own patterns almost.
Right.
Well, industrial revolution, and then urbanization, secularization.
And there's a real need for the elders within the villages talk about this, and they're concerned to bring their youth back and to keep them faithful to their culture. And that would be the good aspects of the culture. But now these other realities that they face are there and need to be transformed.
It seems that almost that the social justice message developed in the Catholic community over the last 100 years could become more important to you as time goes on. That encyclical tradition about ways that we would combat the modern problems created by urbanization and so on.
And we have kind of justice groups in our area, and maybe I can just mention one of the things that they did recently. The last 2 years, in fact, the elephants have come in and destroyed the fields of the people. And this year, the people began to take the names down of all the people whose villages were affected, and then they've gathered these names and produced, letters so that the government can take a look at that area and at least give some protection to the fields and the families in the next years. There seems to be a real priority to protecting the animals in our area, the wild game, the rhinoceros, elephants, lion, that to the point where it's detrimental to the lives of the people. So you begin to weigh out in transforming the culture, where are the people when these other issues are there?
It sounds so strikingly similar to our debate over the loggers and the spotted owl, and how we're going to deal with that kind of problem. How much emphasis do we on preserving a species over against employment, jobs, etc. Yeah, very similar kind of problem.
It's one of the smaller projects in the Justice and Peace group, but just one example of how that is.
Yeah.
But that's so true. When we speak of transformation of culture, in fact, that may be the thing that'll keep people online there. That sense of justice through the gospel, so that they can still maintain the goodness and the beauty within the cultural traditions, and as well see the evils that are there, causing more pain and misery and suffering in people's lives.
I was really interested in that fear question that you had. And what you had to say about fear, and whether you make any progress on all of that or not. I got out of it what you were saying is that, the great preaching that needs to be done, or proclamation, is of trust in God, finally, that God's on our side and is not imposing evil on us and is more powerful than any of the malevolent forces in the world. I mean, that strikes me as really right on target and absolutely essential, and I'm wondering if you see any progress that way.
Well, the progress I see is that almost at every gathering or congress, meeting, synod, this is an issue that's being discussed, and that we in the United States, I would say, can learn a lot just by listening to that dialogue as it occurs on the African continent, to see how they deal with that. Not so sure that we coming from here have a whole lot to say about that, because we don't really understand all the issues, that fear.
Does the fear get played out in other ways, Mike? I mean, how do they deal with the fear of elephants attacking, or lions being along the road when you're walking, or other physical fears, or the kind of fears, anxieties that have become so prominent in our culture of psychological matters, of fear of failure, or fear that one will be isolated and not make relationships, and all of that kind of thing?
Yeah, there's probably a difference. There are those normal fears that or daily fears that are there, and they respond to those accordingly. I mean, when they have to go at night to get water, especially now in the drought time, they have to walk further, so it means going to the mountainous areas at night, so they have to go with their spears to protect themselves from the animals, or at least to try to get some escape. So those are normal fears that are there, but that still is different than the fear that they have connected with the ancestor.
And that's the one you're concentrating
and that's the one
on.
that,
yeah, and really needs addressing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Mike, I was thinking about Vincent Donovan, who's written so much about the experience of being a missioner in Africa with the Maasai tribe, and I remember the book Christianity Rediscovered, in which he said that when he preached the message of Jesus and told them the simple story of Jesus, that it did indeed transform their culture. I remember him saying that at one time the old people, when it was time to die, were taken out and chained to trees. And that's died with the wild animals. And then after they heard the story of Jesus, and he didn't tell them not to do that, he just told them about Jesus, and before long they said, well, let's not put our old people out there, let's let them die here within the village and with loving care. Seemed to me a perfect example of this transformation.
It's a beautiful example of that, and I know that there have been some, like for the Tongas before, they used to kill twins if there were twins born in a family, and that now whether it was the gospel or whether it was people mingling more with other tribes in the healthcare system or how it came about, but they no longer do that.
Interesting.
And that is a custom that
Did
they've
they do
stopped.
that as recently as when you were there? Or?
Just before I went,
Really?
yeah.
We're still doing it.
We're still doing it, yeah.
Well,
I remember going...
Maybe we can give some credit to the Christian tradition and all that. Well, Mike, we've been talking about evangelization of culture. And part of that is to say, how can we help cultures to improve, to serve human beings, to be more humane? And I guess our own conviction is the Christian message has something to say about it. And your beautiful example of them dealing with fear and us preaching a message of trust probably exemplifies that and brings it together. So big part of the task is to help transform the culture so that they can sense the presence of God and live in more humane fashion.